The tow truck's diesel engine rumbled to a stop right in front of Karen's immaculate colonial home on Maple Ridge Drive. Hanging from its thick steel chains was a bright blue Porta Potty, swinging lazily in the cool morning breeze. As the hydraulics hissed and the unit began lowering toward her perfectly manicured rose garden, Karen burst through her front door like a woman possessed. Her shriek tore through the calm suburban morning, echoing down the street and sending half the neighborhood rushing to their windows. The Porta Potty landed with a soft thud right beside her award-winning American Beauty roses, the pride of her yard. Then, as if on cue from the universe itself, the flimsy door creaked open, revealing its dark, ominous interior. Now, before we get to that glorious moment, let me rewind and explain how things got to this point. My name's David. 3 months earlier, I'd purchased a vacant lot in the Oakwood Estates subdivision, a half-acre corner property that I planned to turn into a cozy ranch-style home for my retirement. Everything was above board. I'd filed the permits, hired a well-reviewed architect, and even attended the HOA meeting to introduce myself. The lot had been an eyesore for years, overgrown, littered, and generally neglected. I figured the neighbors would be thrilled to see it finally cleaned up. So every weekend, I'd drive out there and work on it myself, hauling off old tires, clearing the weeds, cutting back the wild growth. I followed every rule in the HOA handbook, starting after 9 a.m., finishing before 5 p.m., and taking Sundays off. Still, that's when I caught the attention of the one person in Oakwood Estates no one wanted to cross, Karen Peaton. She lived 3 houses down in the biggest home on the street and had been HOA president for 6 long, miserable years. In her early 50s, she sported helmet-like blonde hair that never seemed to move, even in strong winds. Karen ruled our quiet neighborhood with the kind of authority usually reserved for dictators. Her weapons of choice: passive-aggressive newsletters, endless citations, and fake smiles that could curdle milk. The first time we met, I was loading dead branches into my truck. I heard the sharp click-click-click of her heels before I even saw her. Karen approached with her clipboard like a prosecutor about to announce a verdict. "Mr. Holt," she said, flashing that tight, brittle smile, "your lot is disrupting the visual harmony of our community." I blinked, genuinely confused. "I'm just cleaning it up. It's been full of junk for years." Karen tilted her head, her voice sweet but sharp. "Change itself can be a form of disruption, and some residents have complained about the noise from your truck." "Which residents?" I asked. "That's confidential," she replied, spinning on her heel before I could say another word. That's when I knew I had a problem. A week later, an envelope from the HOA arrived in my mailbox. My first official citation. I'd violated Code 7.3.2 by leaving construction debris visible from the street for more than 4 hours. The debris in question? The same pile of branches I'd been loading when she approached me. The fin is $75 I paid it, thinking it would smooth things over. Big mistake. Over the next month, the citations piled up like junk mail. My truck was allegedly parked 2 inches over the property line. The safety cones I'd placed around a hole weren't an approved shade of orange. I'd failed to submit Form 47B before removing a dead tree stump. Each fine got steeper. Each discussion with Karen ended with that same smile and the phrase, "Rules exist for a reason." Then came the morning, and everything changed. When I pulled up to my lot one Tuesday, I stopped dead in my tracks. There, smack in the center of my cleared property, not in a corner, not off to the side, but dead center, sat a bright blue Porta Potty. A deluxe model, complete with a white roof and the little crescent moon vent carved in the door. It looked completely ridiculous against the open dirt. I called the number printed on the side. The rental company told me it had been ordered by none other than Karen Peaton, on behalf of the Oakwood Estates HOA, for worker sanitation compliance. When I explained there were no workers, no foundation, no nothing yet, they shrugged verbally. "Sorry, sir, the rental's been prepaid for 6 months. 6 months. I marched straight to Karen's house. She opened the door in her neatly pressed blouse and pencil skirt, ready for another day at the bank. Her smile was even tighter than usual. "Oh, David," she said with mock concern. "I was told there were complaints about your site lacking proper facilities." I stared at her. There's no construction yet. Well, she chirped, Ordinance 12.6 states sanitation facilities must be installed before any work begins. I thought I'd save you the trouble. You're welcome. Then she added, like icing on a poison cake, that the HOA had graciously paid for it using emergency community health funds. If you'd like to move it, she said sweetly, you'll need to submit Form 81C for approval. The board meets again in 3 weeks. For the next 3 weeks, that blue monstrosity mocked me from the center of my property. Every time I drove by, it was like Karen herself was standing there, smirking. The rental company refused to move it without authorization from the person who'd signed the lease. The HOA board, packed with Karen's friends, treated my complaints like I was a nuisance. But Karen had made one critical mistake. I'm a patient man, and I document everything. When I filed an official records request for the Porta Potty rental agreement, I discovered something interesting. The lease wasn't in the HOA's name. It was in Karen's. She'd listed herself as the authorized representative and, more importantly, used her personal credit card for the deposit. That was the key. According to the rental company's terms, whoever signed the lease had full authority over placement and relocation, meaning, if I had written authorization from her, I could move it anywhere I wanted. And guess what? I already had her signature on every single citation she'd mailed me. That's when I called my cousin Mike. He owns a towing and transport company in Riverside. When I showed him the paperwork and explained the situation, he grinned from ear to ear. Let's move some construction equipment, he said. We set the plan for Thursday at 3 a.m. When the night came, Mike rolled up in his flatbed truck with a crane attachment, usually used for heavy machinery. We worked quickly and quietly, securing the unit with chains and straps. The porta potty lifted cleanly off the ground, swaying slightly under the moonlight. 20 minutes later, we were creeping down the empty streets of Oakwood Estates, that ridiculous blue box bouncing gently behind us. Karen's house sat on a corner lot. With a picture-perfect lawn, she worshipped like a shrine. She'd won Yard of the Month so many times, the HOA literally renamed the award after her. The grass gleamed in perfect diagonal stripes, and her rose garden had even been featured in the local paper. We positioned the porta potty right at the edge of her lawn, close enough to be fully visible from the street, yet still technically on her property. Mike lowered it down with surgeon-like precision, setting it exactly 18 inches from her beloved David Austin roses. As a finishing touch, he mounted a small solar-powered light on top, giving the unit a faint blue glow that would shine through the night like a beacon of poetic justice. We took plenty of photos for documentation, wide shots, close-ups, and clear angles proving it was perfectly placed on her land, not blocking sidewalks or violating a single code. The next morning, I parked across the street at 6:45 a.m., sipping coffee from my thermos as dawn painted the neighborhood gold. Right on schedule, at 7 sharp, Karen stepped out of her front door. She wore her usual professional armor, pressed suit, matching heels, and her expensive handbag dangling from one arm. She got halfway to her car before she noticed it. The sound that followed was magnificent. Karen froze mid-step, her mouth forming a perfect O before a scream erupted that could have shattered glass. She stood motionless for 10 seconds, just staring, before storming toward the bright blue intruder like she intended to will it out of existence. Her phone was in her hand within seconds, and she started pacing the driveway, waving her free arm as she spoke into it with wild, furious energy. I could practically guess the order of her calls. The rental company, the HOA board, maybe even the police. But karma, as they say, comes with receipts. When the rental company checked their records, they confirmed that yes, Karen Peaton had full authority over the unit's placement. And when she insisted she hadn't approved this relocation, they calmly pointed out that someone with her verified signature had. By 8 a.m., the spectacle had become neighborhood entertainment. Cars slowed to a crawl, curtains parted. Mrs. Henderson, 2 doors down, even stopped her morning walk to take a photo. Karen, now late for work, was practically shaking with rage. She demanded the rental company remove it immediately, but they explained there would be an additional relocation fee. and since it had been moved from its original site, full prepayment was required. At 9 a.m., the police arrived. From my vantage point across the street, I watched as Karen gestured furiously between her house and my lot, her voice rising higher by the second. The officer listened patiently, took notes, and finally shrugged. The verdict? Potty was on her property. The lease was in her name. No crime had been committed. It's a civil matter, ma'am. By that evening, word had spread like wildfire. The emergency HOA board meeting that night was the most crowded in Oakwood Estates history. The clubhouse was packed, neighbors shoulder to shoulder, buzzing with anticipation. Karen sat at the head of the table, jaw clenched so tightly I thought she might crack a molar. The Potty incident, as it was already being called, topped the agenda. She launched into her speech, painting herself as the victim of a malicious act of vandalism. She demanded immediate legal action and the harshest fines possible against me. But then something happened she hadn't prepared for. Tom Morrison, a longtime board member who usually votes. He, however, Karen told him, cleared his throat. "Before we proceed," he said, "I'd like to review the rental paperwork." Karen hesitated, but the documents were already circulating among the board. The shift in the room was almost visible as people read. Whispers began spreading like ripples in water. Why had Karen used her personal credit card for an HOA expense? Why hadn't the board approved it? Where had those emergency health funds actually come from? Karen tried to explain, but her confident tone wavered. For the first time since I'd met her, she looked cornered. Then Margaret Chen, the HOA treasurer, opened her laptop right there at the table. Her expression darkened as she scrolled through the association's financial records. After several tense minutes, she looked up and said flatly, "I can't find any record of this expense or any withdrawal from emergency funds." The crowd erupted in whispers. Then, from the back of the room, old Mr. Petrov, the neighborhood's first resident, rose slowly to his feet. His voice, thick with a Russian accent, boomed, "I have been waiting 20 years for someone to stand up to this tiny dictator." Laughter burst across the room. And just like that, the dam broke. Years of pent-up frustration came pouring out. Residents began voicing every grievance they'd been too afraid to say before: unfair citations, arbitrary rules, bullying tactics. By the end of that chaotic meeting, 3 things were decided. First, the HOA would take no action against me. Second, a full audit of the association's finances would begin immediately. And third, a special election would be held in 2 weeks to decide whether Karen should remain president. Karen sat there, pale one moment and flushed the next, as her empire crumbled around her. The Potty stayed on her lawn for exactly 17 days. Each morning, she'd come outside and glare at it like she was trying to burn it down with her eyes. She called every towing service in town. None would touch it without authorization from the rental company. She tried to have the city declare it a health hazard, even though it had never been used. One evening, she even attempted to shove it off her property herself, an event several amused neighbors captured on their phones. Meanwhile, the rental company remained unmoved. The outstanding balance for early termination and relocation? $847 until it was paid, they said. The unit wasn't going anywhere. Karen tried to force the HOA to cover it, but with the audit underway and her leadership suspended, the board refused to approve any spending without documentation. Those 17 days changed Oakwood Estates. Neighbors who'd once stayed quiet began to find their voices. Campaign signs appeared on lawns, ironically something Karen's rules had banned. The upcoming election ballot didn't just include the vote on her presidency, but also several new amendments designed to limit the HOA's power and demand financial transparency. On the morning the results were announced, I sat in my usual spot across the street, coffee in hand. The Potty still stood proud on Karen's lawn, its blue panels dulled by dust and sunlight. Karen emerged at her usual time, but the transformation was striking. Her perfectly styled hair looked frazzled. Her power suit had been replaced by something plain and rumpled. She didn't need to read the numbers, I knew she already had. Out of 147 votes, only 12 supported keeping her as president. Every amendment was passed with overwhelming approval. But the real blow came later that afternoon when Margaret Chen released the preliminary audit results. Turns out, Karen had been dipping into HOA funds for years, nearly $38,000 worth, disguised as community improvements. It wasn't grand larceny, but it was enough to ruin her reputation and end her career at the bank. A week later, the district attorney filed charges for embezzlement and misuse of fiduciary funds. The day she was formally charged, she finally paid the $847 and had the porta potty removed. I watched from my lot as the same towing company rolled up, hooked the unit, and hoisted it onto the truck. Karen stood in her doorway, arms crossed, trying to preserve what was left of her dignity. When the truck drove off, she looked up and saw me watching. For a moment, our eyes met. I lifted my coffee cup in a silent salute. She turned without a word and slammed her door. Later, she accepted a plea deal, 2 years probation, 6 months of community service, and full restitution. She was permanently barred from serving on any HOA board again. At sentencing, she stood before the judge in a plain gray suit, no jewelry, no power heels, listening as he lectured her about betraying the trust of her community. When he announced the sentence, she wobbled slightly, but didn't fall. As the officers escorted her out to sign probation papers, her chin lifted in one last attempt at dignity. But this time, everyone saw it for what it was. Not pride, just the final hollow echo of a fallen queen.